House, fortunately, as with Boston, the White House has not overreacted. Not yet, anyway. You may recall all the media garbage about Boston. There were more lies told in 24 hours than I've heard in the last.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It was incredible. So, you know, all you'd have to do, it was, according to my intel sources, it came from blood tests, okay? So all you'd have to do, let's say you're interested in overthrowing Assad, you get your buddy there and you sniff a little sarin, you go in and get a blood test, and that's all you'd have to do to set it up. So the White House has said they're going to do a little more digging, and the intelligence community is going to do a little more digging. This is a red line, as President Obama spoke it earlier. What it's a red line for, I don't know. But I can tell you this right now, and here's the answer to your question. John McCain, Lindsey Graham, and others in my party, and Bob Menendez in the Democratic Party and others of this regime change mindset, would love to use Syria as a backdoor into Iran.
Amen.
Syria and Iran are hugging each other, not because they love each other. You got Alawite Shia over Sunni Shia who are having a hard time at any day getting along suddenly together. And why? Because we ostracize Syria and we want regime change in Iran. What would you do?
Yeah.
You're going to get together.
Yeah.
You're going to get together. So we forced Bashar al-Assad and the Ayatollah to make friends. And we did this during the early days of the Bush administration. And we knew what we were doing. We even withdrew our ambassador, so we would say, hey, take that. Terrible. And this is their way of getting into Iran, because Iran is big time helping Assad. You would argue strategically it has no choice. If it loses Syria, it has no access to Lebanon and Hezbollah. And you can say, well, great. And I would say great too, because it would stop that terrorist outfit from doing what it does to Israel. But it isn't great, because when Syria collapses, Iran will fill it in, and Turkey will, you're going to have a mess. You're going to have a real mess. So
It's a mess already.
what do you do about Syria? Probably what the president's been doing to this point. Let them deal with it themselves. Try to discourage the Sunnis in Saudi Arabia in particular and others. Here you got a situation in Iraq, for example. You got Maliki supporting the Iranians, supporting Assad.
Yeah.
You got Muqtada al-Sadr supporting the Salafist terrorists, I would call them, in Syria. So you got Iraq supporting both sides, and the worst side on the opposition. So what do? I say you stay away from it, and you let the Syrians settle, unless it gets so serious that other interests are impacted, and you have to intervene. How do you intervene in Syria, though? I can guarantee you the Pentagon is giving some very sage advice about that right now. This is not Libya, Mr. President. This is a very different situation.
Yeah.
And what would government of Avigdor Lieberman and Bibi Netanyahu do if we did something like that? Would they suddenly pour out of Israel because they had just seen their greatest dream fulfilled? We can now smash Hezbollah. We can take over Lebanon. We won't just have the West Bank and Jerusalem. We'll have Lebanon too. And don't you put that past those types of Israelis for a minute. 1 out of every 5 Israeli citizens now, yes, 1 out of every 5 is a settler. We have people like John Hagee here in this state sending millions of dollars to West Bank settlers to furnish their expansion.
Oh God!
This is a hell of a deal. One of your congressmen was at one point. Tom DeLay was a big part of that. A big part of that. One Mark Rabinovich walked up to Tom DeLay and asked him at a particular function Hagee was having what he thought would happen to the Jews when the rapture came. And he said, well, they'll all convert.
Yeah, right. That's the one.
You realize what the Bible says? You say it says? It says any unbeliever will be slain with a flaming sword. So how can you explain this alliance between these fundamentalists and Israelis? Well, you explain it because the Israelis are taking advantage of it. And they're stupid enough to be taken advantage of. I mean, that's the only way I can see it. Total money passed is over $300 million. It doesn't sound like a lot when you're talking about deficits of trillions, but it is. Syria is a problem, a real problem. I think the regional impact might be a little bad, and not for the usual suspects. not for Israel. Israel's got 300 plus. When someone tries to tell me that Tehran's not deterred because of the mad mullahs, you know, because they could shoot one at Tel Aviv and it would disappear, or Haifa and it would disappear, I just laugh. I think they're nuts. Do you think they're going to make a collective decision in Tehran to send a couple of nukes at Israel when they know that they would disappear, they would not exist afterwards? No U.S. president would resist that. I mean, even if it were only 60% certain that the missile came from Iran, and it'd be more certain than that. Now, there is a fear about proliferation, because I'll tell you what's going to happen if the Iranians do make a decision, and they have it, and they weaponize. Saudi Arabia will buy 100 from the Pakistanis next week. They probably already have the contracts ready to sign. So you're going to have an uneasy balance immediately. The GCC will fall in behind Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia will be nuclear. Iran will be nuclear. Israel will be nuclear. Pakistan will be nuclear. India will be nuclear. And we'll have a stalemate. Now, will they be able to manage their nuclear power as well as we and the Soviets did, as well as the Indians and the Pacs have to this point, with a lot of help from us, I might add. In 2002, I think it was, we had to actually lecture President Musharraf and go to Delhi and do the same thing because the fools were about to start a nuclear war. But I think deterrence works, and I think we proved it for a long time. Now the issue, though, is selling fissile material or even a nuclear weapon, a small one, to a terrorist group. That's the issue. And I sympathize with some congressmen who go to that issue immediately. They don't think much of the exchange because they believe deterrence works too. And yet, forensic experts in the nuclear field, and they're rare, we have two, one from MIT and one from Harvard on our team. Forensic experts will tell you that with regard to a nuclear explosion, you can, with somewhere between 60 and 70% surety, say where that came from. And with all the information we have on the AQ-CON network and on where fissile material has come from in the past, where it exists now, and the IAEA does a lot to compile this, I'm pretty sure that a president would have at least a 50-50 idea of where that came from. Is that enough deterrence? Because you know what's going to happen to that country. If the president even has a 50-50, that country's going to disappear. Isn't that deterrence? Well, the congressman said, the senator said, I'm not willing to trust that, and I'm not willing for the American people to trust that. And I said, okay, fine, then let's make diplomacy work. Let's get a deal. Don't let them have a nuclear weapon. We've got everybody on board. Even the Russians and the Chinese, however reluctantly, are on board. Let's do diplomacy and let's do it right and keep them from getting a nuclear weapon. He agreed with that.
It was interesting because it kind of broached the subject of small nukes and how you can trace based upon the isotopic ratio. The fear I have is that if a small nuke did go off, got snuck into this country and got lit up in some downtown city, I mean, how do you not know that it might have been a false flag attack from another third party to get the game going between us and the perceived enemies? Yeah,
that's a good point. And it's made even scarier by a briefing that Secretary Powell and Undersecretary Green and I got at the CIA in 2003. And this was by supposedly a team at the CIA who've been studying the phenomenon of terrorism linked with nuclear weapons. And the briefing on terrorism was over about 1,000 years with a lot more documentation for the last couple of hundred than for the first couple of hundred, but nonetheless a fairly good diagram of how terrorism peaks and valleys throughout the last millennium. And we happen to be they put the start of the present time roughly around the fall of the Shah in Iran in '79. So we happen to be, usually these periods of peak terrorism last for about a generation. This one seems to be lasting a little bit longer and seems to have legs to last an even, maybe a half century. So then they did the other brief from the nuclear guys, and they showed how you'd be able to make a small KT nuclear weapon in your garage by 2023. The lines intersect. High propensity for terrorism to occur, make a nuke in your garage. And of course, the first question from us, nuclear neophytes, was how do you get the fissile material? You'll be able to make it from directions on the web. Holy mackerel. You mean you don't need uranium-235 or plutonium or any of that stuff? Nope. So if you want to get scared about 2023. And then, in a serendipitous coincidence, we get a briefing from the FBI 2 days later. And the FBI says, we're not scared of Hezbollah. They're formidable, and if they came here and made a political decision to attack us, they could do a lot of damage. But we don't think they're going to. We're not all that afraid of Al-Qaeda. This was a one-off thing with them, 9/11. You know who we're really afraid of? The domestic terrorist.
Yes.
Who's going to set a bomb off in Boston, going to blow the federal building up in Oklahoma City, going to send ricin through the mail, anthrax through the mail, going to be a Unabomber. We're much more frightened of the American who's going to do this to his own country because we don't know he or she exists until the bomb goes off.
Yeah.
We're tracking these guys, however badly. We're tracking these guys. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
After all, Timothy McVeigh killed a lot of people. And who knew about him until he did it?
Yeah.
So put that together with the nukes, and if you want to be scared about that, but I go back to my original point. Life is dangerous. Go out on the highway. Well, I don't cast aspersions unless I know positively or near positively that it's happening. I know we're providing humanitarian.
There's literally no question. Anybody can research it. They have publicly stated it.
I can go on the web and research that Jesus was a black man.
Yeah, that's not what we're talking about. That's skirting the issue.
Yeah.
We're talking about mainstream news reports.
There's no question that the United States is using Saudi Arabia, using other surrogates to provide things to the rebels in Syria. It is very discriminating provision that tries to stay away from Salafist elements and give to the elements that they think are sounder and more committed to principles of tolerance, open markets, and so
But
forth.
we're clearly involved, and you said that we're not involved.
I don't think so.
And
I don't think so.
I would encourage all of you to find out, because if on that one point you happen to be mistaken, then I really question a lot of what you have to say. And
Please.
I'm sorry to be
Please question
frank
it all.
with you. I'm sorry to be frank with you, and then hearing some of the other things you're saying, like about the real danger is domestic terrorism. This is this is scary where we're going right now. And if we're talking about really fighting for our country, while on the one hand we're supposedly fighting to protect freedoms and export democracy around the world, we're losing it at home, right beneath our nose, in the name of terrorism.
Yeah, thank you for summing up what I wanted to say. The people all across this country who tell me how much they knew in 2001 and 2002 about Iraq's WMD and about other things related to the March to War. And I look at them and I say, when did you come to the State Department and enter my office and talk to me? You're assuming that I knew those things? I didn't know those things. Don't you know those things retrospectively? And 9 times out of 10, I think I'm right. Every now and then, a member of the former inspection teams in Iraq will come to me. One came to me from the Netherlands, for example, and said, I tried to get to your boss. I tried to go through our foreign minister and get to your boss. My foreign minister stopped me. And by the way, they're trying to prosecute right now in Denmark and in Holland some of these people who did some of these things. But basically, no one came into my office, interrupted my very frenetic 24-hour, 7-day, and said, look, here's evidence that what you're saying is wrong. But thousands have done it retrospectively. If people know things, if people understand even intuitively, if not intellectually, and they are opposed to those things developing into an authorization for the use of military force, for example, which is the next step. The Congress is going to take this step in the next 12 months. They're going to vote an AUMF for Iran the same way they voted it for Iraq. Then they need to be saying that to their senators and congressmen, don't you do this. Don't you do this. And anything else that you can do to dissuade them from doing that. there were a couple of people who actually, one from Lawrence Livermore, a lab technician from Lawrence Livermore, who had actually been assigned to one of the first teams under K in Iraq, came in to see me and said, you know, I don't think Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. I think that he's outsourced to Syria his chemicals, very small operation. He's outsourced to the Sudan his biological program. It's in a single warehouse outside Khartoum. And his nuclear program is actually contained in a few disks that he's got spread around amongst his scientists, but he has no active nuclear program. And that would mean there were no stockpiles of chemicals or biological weapons either. All the things that we were saying that he had. And I said, well, what do you base this on? And he said, well, I base this on my own interpretations of what happened in '98 with Clinton's bombings and what happened when we were in there and destroyed most of what he had at the time. And I base it on what some French scientists are telling me and others. Good, I took that on board and my skepticism increased. But it didn't defeat my own intelligence community telling me with 90% surety that he had chemicals, biologicals, and probably an active nuclear program. Only in retrospect do I realize how that intelligence was warped, wrapped by George Tenet and John McLaughlin, and fed to me and Secretary Powell in teeny little bits without anybody else from the agency or from the other intelligence elements in the vast apparatus we have being allowed to come forward because they were all silenced. I don't know how you penetrate that other than with citizen action and demands. Don't do an AUMF. I don't want regime change in Iran unless it's absolutely essential, and you better not tell me it's absolutely essential because you've just consulted somebody like George Tenet. I need a little more proof than that. I don't know any other way to talk about it. Yes. There are aspects of the internet that are just exciting as heck. Because what do we have in the fawning corporate media, as one of my friends likes to call it? As an interview I did tonight. You know, you sit there and you listen to the lead-in and you think to yourself, why am I on this show? You know, it doesn't matter whether it's Fox or MSNBC, any of the cable outfits, they're there for their corporate masters. They're there to put the line out. But there are some places on the internet, and there are still some McClatchy, for example, with about 100 newspapers across the country. By the way, McClatchy before was Knight Ridder and got the Iraq War right. They were the only newspaper chain in America that got the Iraq War right. They kept asking all the right questions and everything, and they drove me nuts. Because they put more skepticism in my head than anybody else. But everybody, New York Times, Washington Post, everybody else, you know, war. It reminded me of William Randolph Hearst and the Yellow Press for the Spanish-American War.
Yeah.
But the internet does have some places, and if we could just get it better and make sure that, as I was saying before, that this stuff doesn't creep in that just destroys everybody's view of the internet because they see some of this other stuff. I was told the other day by a person who ought to know from Microsoft that 2/3 of what goes on the internet every day is pornography and gambling.
Yeah.
So that's one reason why my friends in China don't like it. It's also because it threatens their government, but it's pornography and gambling. They don't want to do that. If the internet were used right, I think we'd have a very powerful source of information for all of you, so that you'd be your question, so that you'd be a lot better informed. How close are we to an authorization for military force? I wouldn't expect anybody out here in Dallas to know that. I mean, tomorrow morning, John McCain will get up and introduce it, and it'll pass. And then, you know, you just got screwed. Sergeant, he introduced me to the only triple amputee in the Air Force. Both legs below the knees and his right arm. 33 years old, married, kid on the way. He's already driving again. They've made him a special van and everything. More mature than your average soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine. He was defusing an IED and it went off. He said to me, every time a congressional delegation comes over here and thanks me for my service, I tell them, don't thank me for my service, thank me for my sacrifice. I'm conflicted over my service. That young man was so powerful with me, I couldn't even hardly speak at him.
My question involves something you said kind of towards the beginning. You said that the Iranian people like us because they like Americans. And I
The Persians.
Okay.
Iran has about 52-53% Persians, and then Azeris and Baluchs and Turkmen and Kurds. It's the Persians that constitute the old empire, vestiges of the old empire, the 5,000-year civilization.
The Persians like us and the rest of the groups that are about 48%?
I don't think they care, frankly. They're too busy smuggling and trying to live.
I guess my question is that my perception of what happened after the regime change in 79 and the events shortly after that was that they didn't like us. Am I wrong in thinking that? And if I'm not, then...
No, I think you've got to look at the overthrow of Mossadegh in '53, which Harry Truman wouldn't touch with a pole, and my favorite president, Dwight Eisenhower, grabbed, largely because of his affection for England, who led him into it. From the overthrow of Mossadegh in '53, 26 years of Iron Man the Shah, and then the revolution. That revolution could have been consolidated by almost any of the elements that were contending. Some of those elements were more democratic, more Mossadegh, more democratic, more tolerant, and so forth. The reason Khomeini turned loose our hostages, which the students took in February, was because he hadn't consolidated his revolution yet. By the time we get to the real hostage taking in the embassy that Argo made so famous, he's consolidated his revolution, and that's going to help him do it even more so he lets them keep them for 444 days. At any point in there, had we been smart enough, and we had State Department people telling us this, we also had CIA people telling us this, to give them credit, we could have probably done differently and made that revolution consolidated around a different group of people than the radical Islamists. It would have been a touch and go thing, but we could have done it. One of the reasons is because the bulk of the Iranian people don't hate us. They still don't hate us. This is a very our relationship with Iran is as complicated as any relationship in the world. It goes back to the Nazis, it goes back to the Russians, it goes back to the Iranians themselves being fleeced by the British and by, guess who? BP. IOAC at the time. Harry Truman said, look, we got a 50-50 deal we just worked out with the Saudi Arabians. Why do you have a 97-3 deal with the Iranians? That is, you get 97%, they get 3%, and the 3% goes to about 12 people. You know, that's the way that's the deal they had. It could have been a very different relationship on both sides. I'm not putting all the blame on us. The Iranians take some of the blame too. You know, blame goes all around. But it could have been a very different relationship at any one of those points in there.
What the United States should do in terms of like a police force, I guess, as Theodore Roosevelt might have conceived it, as someone that controls the world and with its might and like makes things go smoothly. Because I don't think you're a fan of that.
Wow. If you want to be the world's policeman, you're talking to the wrong guy. I'm a Republican. I'm a conservative, a real conservative.
He's right.
We don't go around the world policing it for other people.
So please tell me how you conceive of hegemony, or should we just not? Should the United States try to control others, or should we just kind of back off and, I guess, take a backseat role in the world?
I'll give you George Kennan's answer in the Long Telegram in the X article when he was postulating the strategy that we used during the Cold War of containment. It is by the force and power of our example, lived up to in the world, that we will defeat others, or bring them to our way of thinking, or as close to it as we can in the name of tolerance, open markets, and so forth. And our example is the most powerful thing we have. When we befoul our example, we destroy real power. Unlike almost any other empire in history. Rome had a little. Remember, Paul was a Roman. And Paul made a great addition to the Christian faith because he was a Roman. People liked being Roman. It meant you had roads and food in your belly and a roof over your head and a big, strong army to protect you. So Rome had an image problem too as it went into the empire and as it became more vile and more venal and more empire of barbarians than anything else. So the power of our example is the most powerful thing we have, and every time we tarnish it, we hurt, unlike any other country in the world, we hurt our real power.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, thank you very much.
yeah.
At the beginning of your presentation, you talked a little bit about the torture issue, and that's what really motivated you to speak out. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on the state of the torture issue today, because you mentioned kind of following your time in the administration. I was just curious as to where that stands today.
Yeah. I was very happy when President Obama signed the executive order banning torture. That was good. That was a good move. John McCain and Colin Powell and I helped the night he got it through the Senate. Colin Powell wrote a letter, I helped him with it, and we put it on every senator's desk. So we got the armed forces out of it. Those two actions were great. The President promised to close Guantanamo, didn't, because when he got in, everybody got him. John Brennan, everybody else captured him and said, can't do this, can't do this. Oh, and the Congress put lots of pressure against him. Tell me how we've had 300 terrorists in our jails for years without any of them breaking out and doing anything, and now we're scared to bring any of those guys into our federal jails. I'll tell you why we really don't want to bring some of them up. It's because we have no case against them at all.
That's right.
And it would all fall apart. I'm not saying that some of them aren't hardcore terrorists. I'm just saying we ruined the case against them. You couldn't take them in. You couldn't even take them into a military tribunal. Now we've got something like 86 who've been cleared by everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody's cleared them. The Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, everybody's cleared them. Can't get them home anywhere. So we're not releasing them, we're leaving them there. So what do we got now? I was told yesterday we got 133 of them in hunger strike
Yeah.
now.
That's right.
It's probably going to go all the way to the total number down there. They'll have a hunger strike, and we're force feeding and all that kind of stuff. We should close that place. I keep saying this. I'm willing to risk it. Close that place because, again, back to your point, we're damaging our reputation in the world every day that Guantanamo stays out.
Amen.
Yeah.
We are.
And it seems to me that we should be supporting our allies, as few as they are, especially in that area, as much as possible. It's unbelievable for other people have to withdraw funds from them and potentially support.
No, I'm just advocating what George Washington advocated. Never get too close to any nation in the world that their policy is your policy. That's George Washington. There is a real crisis in interpretation of strategic liability and strategic asset. Now, I'm going to speak as a realpolitik military professional. Our hard assets in that region are not in Israel. They're in Oman, Bahrain, the largest fleet headquarters in the United States Navy. They're in Egypt still. They're in Saudi Arabia. The largest airfield complex in the world is in Qatar. Our hard assets for our security are not in Israel. They're in other countries. Israel is a strategic liability, not a strategic asset. As a military man, now let me finish. As a citizen, with 5 million Jews living in this country, with the history that the Jews have had, especially in World War II, there is no way that America is going to back away from wholesalely Israel. Harry Truman proved that when he essentially recognized Israel over his major military man's objection, George C. Marshall. No greater hero has America known other than George Washington himself. And Marshall said, if you approve Israel, if you recognize Israel, I won't vote for you. That's how serious he was, because he recognized the strategic liability Israel presented. All that said, there's no way we're going to back away from them, and the relationship, as you just pointed out, is a strategic asset in itself, because they are like us and we're like them. And so that is a very important aspect of hard power, too. What I'm pointing out is that Israel's future is in dire jeopardy, and we're aiding and abetting that jeopardy. That's what I'm pointing out. As I told the rabbi, and as the rabbi hugged me and kissed me afterwards, I'm for Israel's long-term security, not its short-term acquisition of more land and Jerusalem and its short-term failure.
Good.
I don't disagree. On 2 days ago, I met with the shadow minister of the Labor Party. He's not in the Lib Dems, he's the Labor. He was actually Blair's MOD the last year of the Labor Party's reign. He's shadow defense minister now. And he asked me the same question, just point blank. He's the member from North Durham in England. And he said, is there any possibility? And I told him what Colin Powell had said to H.W. Bush back when. He said, the genie's out of the bottle. You're never going to put it back in. Therefore, we always will have nuclear weapons. Somewhere. And while Colin Powell would probably say he applauds your intimation that we ought to go to zero, we never are. That said, we have studied it in the military. There's a report out of the Air War College at Maxwell Air Force Base. 300 is all we need.
That's
And
right.
300 is all we need. Now, let me tell you what we encountered when we did the Moscow Treaty, and we brought some 28,000 down to, the treaty says, somewhere between 1,200 and 2,200, which now the new SALT agreement has made even more firm and brought lower. Here's what we ran into. We ran into those people you just talked about. Those people who make tritium. Those people who make the pits, who make the weapons and so forth. Man, they're a massive complex. And their jobs. And so you try to do anything to the Norfolk shipyards in my state, man, you'll get 2 senators on your case real fast. And yet both are Democrats, and both are fair. Tim Kaine and Mark Warner are fairly decent guys. But you talk about the jobs in Norfolk, they're going to come after you. You tell them carriers are obsolete. They are. Aircraft carriers are the battleship of the 21st century. You put a 65 centimeter Wakeoming torpedo from 30 kilometers away up under Nimitz and she's going to sink, and 5,000 souls are going to be on the bottom of the ocean. There isn't an exercise that happens in the Navy that a Los Angeles class or better attack submarine doesn't surface by the carrier and say, bang, you're dead. None of the carriers' vaunted defenses have detected that submarine. So, we're trying to figure that out in the Navy right now, trying to figure out what's going to replace this capital expensive ship. Meanwhile, it's very useful for brush fire wars, for projecting power, because no one else has got any, and you can be there and you can do things from it, especially if you got 3 or 4. But it is a problem, like nuclear weapons. How do you discard these things? Probably not completely until something more deadly comes along. Something even more dead. Drones. Think of drones, for example, with directed energy beams on them.
No.
Or something like that. Something that you could fly over New York City. You've seen Independence Day, right? You've seen the movies. Science fiction is sometimes predictive. I mean, when something like that comes along. But I do have, and Tom Pickering and others have talked about this, and we talked about it at the State Department a lot. If you started out small with no nuclear-free zones, and you tried to move those zones around until you encompass most of the world, and you develop the protocols and the standards and the inspection regimes and everything as you went, you probably could get close. I agree with Colin. I don't think you're going to ever get rid of them entirely, but you could get close. And you're right. We have the obligation under the MPP to do that. As this shadow minister was telling me, when are we going to do it?
Yeah.
We have made progress, though. We have come down from a whole bunch to not quite as many. Real problem isn't nukes. Believe me, the real problem is not nuclear weapons. The real problem is hegemony in the Persian Gulf. The real problem is who's going to be the big guy in the Persian Gulf. Ultimately, the realization is there that the big guy from time to time will have to be backed by the United States to be the really big guy, but that's the real struggle. And the struggle is triangular. GCC and Saudi Arabia over here, they want to be the big guy with the U.S. to back them up. Iran over here, who was for 26 years the big guy that we backed up, and Israel, who doesn't want the United States having a real rapprochement or a real decent relationship with either. That's the real struggle in the Gulf, which no one in Washington will tell you about. That's what's happening. So how do you, that makes it tougher though, not easier, that makes it tougher. So how do you deal with that? If you're the United States, you probably have to go back to what's called often in esoteric military circles, offshore balancing. That is you never put a boot on the ground. You get all the troops out of Afghanistan, out of Iraq, out of Kuwait and so forth, and you put marine amphibious groups, carrier striking groups and whatever we come up with, LCSs and so forth, offshore that can project power, backing up one of those anytime you need to, or doing what you need to for your own interest. And not having boots on the ground, because boots on the ground just have, you know, a star on their back. Shoot me, Al-Qaeda, or whatever. It really creates a problem. If you're familiar with bin Laden's fatwa, his real problem was post-First Gulf War when we left U.S. boots on the ground in Saudi Arabia. That's the real reason he said he struck us.
So you're saying that it'll be difficult, but it is what we want.
It is doable. It's doable if we don't take anybody's side too ardently.
Yeah.
And we stay on our own side, and we balance as we need to. We might even from time to time have to rebuke Israel, you know.
Well, good.
And of course we're going to have. I'll give you another insight here. I think you are never going to settle Afghanistan, Iraq, or any of the regional problems without Iran. 70 million people in a vast territory with immense strategic depth, a culture 5,000 years old. You're never going to settle the problems you have in that region without Iran. So as long as you keep her as a pariah and push her off and don't even talk to her, you're exacerbating your other problems too.
That's right.
This is something else we pointed out in our project. Yes.
You talked about how President Eisenhower warned against the military-industrial complex in his farewell address. And JFK got in the way of that procedure. He tried to get in the way of it with peace, and he didn't want to go to war and didn't want to invade Cuba. Then he was assassinated, and a week later, LBJ signed the National Security Memo 263, which opened the door to Vietnam. And since then, we've been in an ongoing war economy. When are we going to finally know what happened there? Not the mainstream media giving us this bullshit about one man from a window. When are we going to finally know the truth?
I don't know. All I can tell you as an academic is my kids have been over, I can call them kids, they're 20-somethings. They have been over the Warren Commission, lock, stock, and barrel, and I can't refute what they tell me, which is, in my view too, it was a total whitewash. But I don't know what the truth is. I really don't. But the Warren Commission, from the very get-go, was a whitewash. Would you form a commission to study a president's assassination and then make the man who makes the commission run and work and everything else the guy Kennedy fired for the Bay of Pigs? Alan Dulles. I mean, you all, that's kind of like George Bush putting Zellick over there as the executive secretary for the 9/11 Commission. That's a whitewash too.
Oh, absolutely.
That's a whitewash. The classified version of the 9/11 Commission probably tells you how many Saudi princes funded the 19 hijackers. But we can't ever let that out. Not for 25 years anyway. That 25 years we'll have all forgotten. I mean, I remember when they took the moratorium off Mossadegh, and one person over at the National Security Archives at George Washington University actually said, geez, man, this is interesting. What American knows about Mohammed Mossadegh?
Yeah.
What American knows that Kermit Roosevelt, the real courageous CIA individual who caused, just like in the film Argo, CIA called him, MI6, all cancel. We're not going any further. Cancel. Kermit said, to hell with you. Stayed there and did it.
Yeah, right.
And then, what does Kermit get offered? Guatemala in *54. What does Kermit say? No way, I'm out of here. Next time you want to change the regime, send in the Marines. I mean, you know, he was disaffected from the whole process too. We don't know the truth in this country. Who won World War II in the European theater? Soviets. Yeah, that's slipping out a little bit now. It's coming out a little that 100 Wehrmacht divisions went all the way to Stalingrad, and the Soviets beat them with millions of casualties, but they beat them. We didn't win in Europe. We almost lost in Europe when we did the Battle of the Bulge and had 74,000 casualties in one battle, more casualties than MacArthur had in the entire Southwest Pacific Theater in the entire Pacific War. Battle of the Bulge, German counteroffensive in the Ardennes, 1944 to 45. Almost split the coalition. Only now are we beginning to understand the realities of that theater. What do? The winner always writes his myths,
Right.
right? But
A smart guy, worked his way up, he worked hard. Let's just say we diverged. But the point would be, you can do it too, but you have to work really hard, and you have to really be smart, and the truth is hard to find. It's very hard to find, and you know how to shine the light on it. But it's an incredible thing that a leading neoconservative is right here, but here's the thing that I don't quite understand. The message seems to be so, to me, almost bizarre, that it's almost always a military solution to everything. That's what they say. That power corrupts everybody else, but never us. And
that we can lie in the name of that power.
absolutely. And that we would, a new American century, not only would we have this, but we would have our century. How does this resonate with so many people? When you look at all of the names that they plastered all over those letters and all of those resolutions and everything, and I'm sure you knew and do know a lot of those. Can you help us understand how that could have been so influential and what you can really do? Because they're still influential.
Yes. I think it's fair to say that this is my perspective, but it's fair to say after listening to so many, over 200 case study presentations, many of which involved them over the last 8 years, that these people are not, first of all, they're not conservatives. I'm a conservative. Conservatives believe, as Edmund Burke said so eloquently, in preserving the best that's been thought and said and done in the world for as long as possible, and only changing it with great circumspection. That's a conservative. Therefore, you're against spreading freedom and democracy at the point of a bayonet. You're against things like lying. You may lie, but you're against it. Okay? ask William Howard Taft. Ask Vandenberg, any of those guys that were just, the essence of this. The neoconservatives are radicals.
Yeah.
They are more like the Jacobins who polluted the French Revolution. Maximilien Robespierre and others. But they're brilliant. Not all of them.
Not all
of them. Douglas Feith was an idiot. Richard Pearl is brilliant. Bill Kristol is brilliant. And they beat the hell out of my boss, for example, and me, because they had a vision, a strategy to implement that vision, and were ruthless in carrying that strategy out, and they had the vice president on their side.
Yeah.
And they had a neophyte as president who didn't understand until 2006, 6 years, what his vice president was doing to him. That's when he fired Donald Rumsfeld, because Rumsfeld was helping the vice president. How they have such continued traction befuddles me, because they have revealed themselves and they've revealed their tactics, and yet, as I said, they're doing the same thing all over again with respect to Iran, and they're gaining traction. The only thing I can add to that is no one stands in their way because they're frightened of them. Now, Democrats are frightened of showing any ankle on national security. Therefore, they had to restore that. This goes all the way back to George McGovern. They've now restored it. Getting bin Laden, that restored it for the Democrats. They dare not lose that. So they can't even talk to Cuba, because it's out of the ken of doing anything that would get John McCain and Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz and others up on their hind legs and shouting at them. So that's why, I think that's why the Democrats are scared. That's why the president lacks moral courage with respect to anything new in national security. Republicans are cowed by the fact that the extremists, including the neoconservatives, have taken over their party.
That's right.
Yeah.
They're murdering my party. My party is committing suicide. It kind of figured that out in this last election. But the things I'm hearing from them now as palliatives, as correctives, as, ameliorating, are nonsense. They're talking about, well, we need a few Latinos. Well, we need to talk to women better. It's crazy. And those of us who are sitting around watching our party self-destruct, partly on the national security foreign policy side because of the neoconservatives you just outlined, are befuddled by it. I don't know how you maintain this kind of sway over two political parties for so long, and also moving us towards another war in Western Asia. It's mind-boggling to me. And I'll go up to people I assume you're a sound and sane and sober gentleman, and I will say something like this, and they'll say, "Oh no, you're wrong. They're not gaining any traction. We know them now."
No.
And then the next thing I know, they voted another sanction on Iran. Or right now in the Congress, written by AIPAC,
Yes.
is legislation for an AUMF with respect to Iran. Right now. Senate Resolution 65, sponsored by Lindsey Graham, but murdered by us. We tried anyway. We got a lot of amendments in there. We got a lot of different language in there. It's just hortatory. It's not statutory. But it nonetheless paves the ground for the authorization of military force. And it passed. So, I mean, they're still working their magic, whatever that, it's black magic. They're
That's
working.
like magic.
Yeah.
We have time for maybe one question back here in the back.
I know that the United States government is basically sort of tarnished with the Operation Paperclip. Could you give us some insight as to what the purpose of Project Monarch was? I know it's probably similar to Project MK Ultra, but I'm more curious about Project Monarch.
I know Paperclip. I'm not sure I'm familiar with Monarch. Can you enlighten me? Because it's more important. The mandate is what the president has laid down. All options are on the table. His current option of choice is diplomacy. Diplomacy is sanctions. Sanctions won't work. Where does that leave? That's the mandate. The mandate is clear. The president has announced it. The American people have apparently acceded to it, and the Congress loves it. Not all of them, but most of them. So, diplomacy doesn't work. You have two choices. Back down. Congress will never let you do that. And the other one is the military option. Bombing first, and then when bombing doesn't work, do you back down then? Well, you might, because you get out of office. You'll be out of office, because it'll probably, if it's devastating, it'll probably delay the program by 5, 6, 7 years. They'll make a decision and weaponize, but it'll delay it by that amount of time. Plus, think what's going to happen to international opinion after all that bombing and all those TV, Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, and all the others get in there and look at it and see all those dead women and children and maybe radioactivity floating across Bushehr or Tehran or Isfahan or whatever. All international opinion is fickle as hell. And it will go to the Iranians immediately and leave the United States as soon as the bombs start dropping and the photos start coming out. So, I mean, that's the mandate. It's not a very pretty mandate, but it's there. It's there as clear as the nose on your face.
I think we probably should, at this point, we probably should. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate everybody coming out this evening.